Dr. Nanette Davis's new book, Raging Currents, is a memoir of love, mental illness, and caregiving. A swirling narrative carries readers from the pre-World War II Illinois to the infamous Oregon State Mental Hospital of the 1980s, and forward along a harrowing chasm driven by Dr. Davis's powerful love for her mentally ill sister and son. Raging Currents offers more than an inspirational memoir. It provides practical advice and solace for modern caregivers, friends, families, and people living with mental illness. And it's my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Davis. How are you, Doc?
Thank you, Gary.
So that's a very motivating, scintillating kind of introduction to a book. Yeah. Talk to me about the book, the background of it, why you wrote it, and what you hope caregivers get from it.
Okay, well, thank you. I wrote the book after my sister Sharon died, and I thought, her life has not been expressed with her schizophrenia, and that it was important that she not go unnoticed. I felt very much that I had really lost Sharon, and I wanted to regain her. And so I think the book was motivated by that. But in the meantime, I was wrestling with my son and his mental illness. And we didn't know that it was mental illness. We thought it was just a difficult adolescence.
Yeah.
And that's how the psychiatrist was treating my son. And I knew something else was afoot. But he had a different condition than my sister's. My sister had the schizophrenia and he had bipolar. And so difficult. So I kind of wrote two books. The first book that I wrote was Losing Sharon. And then I had to stop when I realized that all my readers had given me feedback that we need more on Michael, because I had a little short chapter. So that opened me up to really a major revision. So this book has taken 9 years to write. And in the meantime, I've picked up a lot of wisdom along the way, I hope, about mental illness. And I think also memoirs take more time.
Yeah.
In the sense, I've written a number of other books, academic books and books on elder caregiving. But I think that the memoir requires the sort of letting the memories come, and they don't all come at once. I was assisting my husband, for example, on his book on combat missions. He's a World War II veteran. And I noticed that once I opened his little brain drawer to get certain items out, it was interesting how they just kept growing, which is the nature of memory when you're looking back in time, especially when I was working with my own growing up, which is, of course, my sister's growing up. And so my motivation for the book originally was Sharon, but then I became very preoccupied with what was happening with mental illness in this country and the awful neglect and disorganization surrounding assistance, if you will. Nobody really seemed to know how to do it.
Well, I agree with you. The memoir, that's a pretty honest, sharing, and gutsy kind of a book to write, because you cut yourself open and you relive all these things that you may not have wanted to remember, to be able to educate your audience. And so I think that's an honorable thing to do.
Well, I appreciate that. And a number of people have said to me, how could you do it? Why do you want anybody else to know all that? And I would have liked to have passed over it and just said, well, my mother was just such a lovely lady. And but unfortunately, she was a really bad alcoholic. And when I say that, I mean that she was not able to keep her responsibilities as a parent. And it's something that, of course, was edged deeply on me. So I started out kind of being her parent. And that didn't work out too well, as the book indicates. You know, it's hard to be a child and a parent at the same time. And
That's true.
yeah, I know a number of people that try to do that to their children, and it's really a bad
You know,
situation.
it's an interesting point about your mother, because anytime you see a caregiving situation in the family, it's an entire family situation. It doesn't just
Exactly.
reside with the one person who needs care. And
Exactly.
so to dig deeper and to look at the history of it and what your mother was going through, you probably even go back a little further and see what her upbringing was. But
Yes.
it informs what you want to share with the caregivers, I think.
Yes. Well, it was interesting because there was no alcohol in her growing up experience, but there had been in the past. This Irish family had
Right.
had a history, and then of course it was a different epoch as well. Drinking was secretive. Women did take drugs. Um, Morphine was around, and so was laudanum. But essentially, it was a secret thing. And while men went to the bar, women stayed home and did their drinking. Uh, but by the 1920s, when my mother came into adulthood, it was a open field, and it was no longer considered unladylike. You could have cocktails and so forth. So a lot of our modernism we have to pay for now and of course the addiction problem is totally out of control now.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, what did you learn? I mean, you're obviously well read and quite educated. What did you learn from your family situation that you processed and said, "Oh boy, now I need to share these tips, these tools, these techniques, this information with other family members, so maybe I could shortcut the pain that they go through"?
Okay. Well, I will tell you one thing. I always believed there was a cure, and I worked on that with my sister. That there was a cure, that we would find the cure, that I would find the right approach, and that it was my responsibility. And until I had a vision that it could not be so, that mental illness is a lifelong kind of disease. It is related to the brain, and we have to honor it. We have to recognize, first of all, what it is. Family members cannot be in denial, as mine were. And even my husband, late husband, dealing with Michael, he wanted to whisk it away. And it was so in our face. And once other family members know that this is the case, then we start getting busy and talk about, okay, you've got to take your medication, and you have to make your own decisions, but we're here for you. But I assure you that this is a very long road. Okay, it's a long road, and I'm still traveling it with my son Michael, who is now living in a, well, I would say it's a chosen shelter. In this case, it means he's already been through a different kind of a more generic shelter, and now he is moving up because he is currently in sobriety. And so we have both the mental illness, and in many cases, we also have the alcohol and or drug kind of situation. So we're dealing with both.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I found that out with my sister as well. Even when she was on medication, she liked to drink when we went out. And I put a stop to that when I recognized that was not, that was not cool. And it is a learning experience. And perhaps if I write another book, it will be, here are the steps,
Well,
instead of having to go through all of those that I have struggled, basically stumbled on. And but it won't go away. It won't go away. And so one of the things I now always ask my son, are you on your meds? Yeah. And you can't ask him about his sobriety program. That's off the,
right.
okay, that's off the docket. Okay, it's not my business. But he responds well when I ask him about his meds. And he's still my little guy.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Well, walk me through. I've got the book. I'm a family caregiver. From the beginning to the end, you close the book. What journey do you want to take us on? What do you want to walk us through from the very first time meeting you guys on page 1 to when we close the book?
That's kind of an open-ended question.
Yeah, why not?
Well, I'll tell you, the book, I'm going to be a little academic here. The book is organized in such a way that first we meet my family, and with my father's perfectionism and his need for social order. Oh, the man just required so much order. And my mother was just kind of one of those very alive people who was always laughing, and she just loved a good time, and a pretty girl, little small Irish lady with a big smile, and quite beautiful. She was always, people said, oh, she looks like a movie star, Hedy Lamarr, if anybody remembers Hedy.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, in any event, I think these two collided. And my mother couldn't keep up with his demands. There was no question, no matter how hard she tried. And it was kind of it was a sad process because I was the oldest and I was seeing this all unraveling. But I was also the scapegoat because my father was so angry when he found he couldn't control his wife. And so that's the background.
Yeah.
Came out of. And so, and when I eventually got married, I found I was just leaving it. I had to leave as soon as I could. But then I kept coming back. And so some of my story talks about coming back. And of course, they couldn't treat me any nicer then than they did when I was, an adolescent, and trying to do the best I could with the grades and the mother and the etc. I rebelled plenty, but my rebellion now seems so gentle compared with what's going on today and how kids talk to their parents. I mean, I know I irked my father a great deal because I did talk back. I wasn't going to take it, lying down. So I learned how to deal with the boys' club by dealing with my father. Okay, so then the next step is when I, shall we say, was invited, when I was told that I was to go to Chicago and get my sister so my father could pick her up and bring her back to California. That sounded like a very grand idea. So I went into her apartment building, and this is in Chicago, and I'm now living out here in Washington State. And I had planned to go to a conference, but the conference went by the board. Well, I attempted to get my sister out of that apartment and visiting. So that's the way we set it up as a visit. And then Dad would come to visit, and everything would be just lovely, and we'd have a wonderful Christmas. Well, as it turns out, my father decided not to visit at that time, and it was my job to do this. And I had 6 children, and I was just coming back into, I was coming into a new job and a new city, and having just moved from Michigan into Portland, Oregon, where my job was. And I realized that I now had the biggest baby of all, which was my sister, who was not on any medicine and refused to leave the house to get any. And I couldn't get anybody there. And so she was with us a couple of months. I've lost track at that point. That was a very, very horrible time for the family because she raged and raged and raged and raged some more. So finally, I got a little scheme going, and I'm a schemer. Having raised 6 children, one must be. And so what I did is I blocked all the entrances with some of my students, and I had a police officer who brought in a couple of her female colleagues, and then we called the police, the mental health police, and this really nice guy showed up. But as soon as that fellow showed up, my sister went bonkers, jumped on me, and so he didn't know the difference, and he said, "Suspect had gun." So that's how we got her into mental health. Suspect had gun, because the mental health officer had no idea. He just assumed that, yeah, that was what was going on.
There's just some traditional family situation, but
Yeah.
they know you were coping. And that's an interesting point, that the whole thread of your story, your personal story, is the challenge of trying to fit in with families that have the different psychological paradigm, all these different paradigms going. So it's very impressive.
Yeah, yeah. So in a sense, once I had Sharon in care, then I hoped to build from there. And so that actually did happen for a period of time. And it was, I thought, well, she's on her own now. It's just wonderful. She's got this help. Things are in line. I mean, I spent quite a bit of time with counselors and so on, but I just felt so good that I could help her. And I have that need, to help.
Yeah.
Which can slam in your face, because there's certain points at which you can't help.
That's an interesting lesson too. There's 3 things that you mentioned I thought just registered. One is you can't fix it, no matter what it is. I had a conversation with an author on Alzheimer's, and it took a long time to realize that you can't fix what his wife's going through. So he had to, make the best of living through her world. And the other one is, it's not your fault. She can't fix it.
I know.
And then this one that I think is an inspiration based on your conversation and what you're trying to do with your family members.
Yes. I think one of the things I found in both cases, that it's a cycling and a recycling. So I learned through counseling, which I've had a lot of counseling about this whole thing. In fact, a counselor turns you into the counselor so that you can do the job in your family.
Great point.
Yeah, because they may not want to go, and you are the one that really has to say the right words, or it's all off. But in this case, Sharon recycled many, many times, and the system got harsher and harsher and less likely to want to work with her. And so she was living in SROs, at single room occupancies, not a nice apartment, in very bad parts of town.
Yeah.
Dangerous parts. My sister is uncanny, very, very bright woman, very bright. And she was actually, her schizophrenia started at 27, and she was in the midst of a master's degree at Loyola University in Chicago in philosophy. And I thought, oh, that girl's always been so much smarter than anybody else. And it was right in the middle of that.
Oh.
And of course, my father is old fashioned, and you know what he said? Well, of course, we would expect that when women try to get too much education. So what did you think when I went out for a PhD?
You would expect that he would say that.
The poor man was just beside himself. Yes, exactly. But it didn't turn out to be the case. Yeah, I held up pretty well. But Michael was the same way. So the Michael saga, my sister, how it happened is that she kept running away. because anything that happened in the apartment building that she was in, that impacted on her. I mean, if somebody went berserk, if she met an alcoholic in the hall and he tried to make a pass at her, she went berserk, et cetera, et cetera. And then she would run. That was her standard mode.
Right.
And then we had to look for her and locate her. But by that time, the landlord wanted to get rid of Sharon so he could rent to somebody else, because he found that she was, she wasn't paying her rent on time and a number of other, oddities. So in a sense, that was just a cycle until she became elderly and ill. And so then I was able to get help, physical help, and the physical help landed her in some wonderful care at the, so that was a blessing.
So your journey is one I'm most interested in. From when you started this, obviously, you're, as you say, you're extremely well educated, but this was a journey of who you are when this started and the lessons you learned along the way. Do you have a maybe handful of tips that you could share with family caregivers based on the lesson you learned on your personal journey of caregiving?
Get your support group going. That's an important thing. Live through their traumas, because they keep doing it. My son's relapsing over the years, mental illness over the years, and I have agonized over each and every one, and I try to verbalize it. And so I find somebody to verbalize, or I meditate over it, or I make an effort when I do my walks to try to expel the energy that it takes to deal with the grief. Recently I rejoined Al-Anon after setting up a number of Al-Anon meetings in Portland. I'm in Bellingham, Washington now as a retiree. And so I found that the Al-Anon is a good place to take the idea that you're at fault and I didn't say the right thing the last conversation we had, et cetera, et cetera. And so the Al-Anon is just a remarkable tool that you can use, especially when you have the drinking and drugging involved. It was less so with my sister because she just stopped drinking as soon as I said no more drinking, period. And she was a little more amenable to my recommendations than my son. And of course, that's a natural thing. So I would also say that you have to give yourself credit for what you have done.
Good.
And recognize that it's kind of almost, you're recycling with them. I'm very intuitive, and I can't really help myself by going through some of this with them, but I'm trying increasingly, because it's still going on, to take a witness perspective and say, well, that's excellent. That's really wonderful, Michael. I'm so happy that you're doing this. Keep up the good work, and give me a call at the end of the week and we can talk some more about where you are. And I don't get upset. I try to flow with him. And what I found, though, is that when he's been drinking or he is in one of his really low cycles, I say, Mike, I'm not able to talk right now. And once you are a little clearer, then we can have a nice mother-son talk, okay?
That's a nice position. Take a witness position to it, where you're stand away from it, where everything's not emotions. And I always call that being the CEO of Caring for Your Loved One, Inc., where you are the.
That's good. That's well said.
It's a professionalization of the family caregiver. So
it really is true. One must. And for you to go down with them is really a mistake because you're it. And a couple of my grandkids could use a little of my help, but I think I'm a little drained at this point.
Maybe it's time to care for you.
I have a little friendship group. It's a friendship, a kind of a social, spiritual group. And the other day, one of the women said, something, I've been taking care of this. She's had a mentally ill brother, and I've been taking care of that. And I just went through a horrible divorce, and I've been trying to take care of my children. I got lost. I'm lost. I've got to find myself. And so she said, from now on, I am finding who I am and what I want. Now that's the ticket.
It's a better thing for the rest of her family to see, to model. Oh, look at, I always say caring for yourself is job one, because who's going to step in and care for you and them when you fall apart?
Exactly. I think caregiving, of course, is truly a blessing. And I think it's anybody who's a caregiver is really a living saint. And, that's our modern example of sainthood.